Now, can the internet handle this? I'm not 100% sure. We're going to try it out. What's up? What's up on YouTube, everybody? Thanks for tuning into the broadcast. Oh my gosh, we got like screens on screens on screens. Goodness gracious. All right, we'll give everybody just kind of a minute to we'll give everybody a minute to kind of tune in here, get into the broadcast with us. But welcome everybody to NBA League Pass. For those of you who are just tuning in, you know, it's been kind of an up and down first half of game here. You know, Thunder got down to a big deficit, and then they ended up coming back towards the end of the half. Mavericks extending it out just a little bit here, but overall, pretty good game. Whenever, Jaron, if you see a question or something you want to take, go ahead and take it. But we're ready to start rolling. So if you want a shout out or you got a question, feel free to hit us up.
Right now, the bench for the Mavericks getting it done. We got Devin Harris and Steph Curry. Both putting in 12 points for Trey and 14 for Devin Harris. I think that the best squad for the Mavericks is getting it done right now. And Jalen Brunson's also getting 11 points. So Jalen Brunson, fantastic college player.
Yeah, Brunson's been balling out, especially in kind of the second half of the season. Yeah, Brunson's been legit. Trade up or lay it up. Nothing in between. Nothing in between. Man, hey, shouts all the fans watching on YouTube and on Instagram. You guys are awesome. You know, for those of you who don't know Jaron, you definitely are going to want to follow and do all of his content. He's one of the best sneaker reviewers in the game. You know, digs into the tech side of sneakers as well. He's got a really great video on the new Nike self-lacing sneaker that I watched just the other day. Adapt BBs that are super sweet. So yeah, definitely go give that man a follow if you haven't, because if you need that sneaker information, he's one of my first stops if I'm looking to buy a new pair of kicks or if I'm looking to try a new pair out.
So I see a lot of questions about you know, there's a lot of things. What is like the first things you work on with stuff like when you're working on a shop?
Good question. You know, so the number one mistake that I think a lot of coaches make when it comes to shooting instruction is that they have like their set things, right? You know, they feel like everybody needs to do this with their feet and everybody needs to do this with their hands and everybody needs to do this. And what you end up finding out is everybody's really an individual. We're all different sizes, we're different heights, we're different strengths, we're different ages. And so really there is no one size fits all when it comes to shooting instruction. So there are some variables, you know, like here or there that tend to be similar in between people. But the first thing I'll do is I'll kind of, you know, evaluate the player themselves and then make kind of recommendations based off that rather than like, hey, we need to tear down your entire form and fix it from the ground up. Generally, you can have really good results just from, you know, tweaking what players need rather than what you feel as a shooting coach is like the right way to do it. You know what I mean?
And that's very cool. Like, you know, growing up, the best teachers for me, not just in basketball, but, you know, school and everything, were the ones that kind of worked with the student and kind of taught them the best that those students could learn.
Yeah.
So what you say here is, you know, some coaches are like, no, this is what you're doing it wrong. But whereas here, you're like, okay, I'm going to see what you're working with, and we're going to move on the best way I think is for you personally. So that is definitely a very cool tip.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, I'm not sure. I can't tell if many of your followers have jumped in the live stream. So maybe let's do like, you know, 10, 15 minutes on my live stream and then we'll swap it out and have one jump onto yours. So for, you know, if you're wanting to hear like sneaker related answers, everybody, in maybe like 10 minutes, we're going to switch out and go to Jaron's feed on Instagram live. And then that way keep your sneaker comments, get ready for them to come on his feed because dude is a sneaker master. But I'm going to go over to YouTube here real quick.
Who do you think has the guiltiest, the most textbook, or whatever you want to say?
Man, I get that one a lot. I'm partial to Steph Curry. I think, what he's done with his mechanics and what he's been able to do for the game is pretty much unparalleled compared to what a lot of other, players have been able to do. I think from a textbook standpoint, it's not necessarily what people would think of as like a textbook jumper. Yeah, he's got a little thumb to it, right? He turns his feet, which a lot of people don't think you should turn your feet. He starts the ball lower down by his waist, a bunch of stuff that like generally isn't textbook to a lot of people. So if I had to pick like a textbook jumper, I'd probably pick more Klay Thompson as far as like, what people would assume is kind of, the textbook jumper. You know, with that being said, like I mentioned, there's really no perfect way, right or wrong, to be able to shoot the ball. Everybody's going to be a little bit different. And it's all about kind of maximizing your release kind of by yourself. You know what I mean?
Let me tell you guys, I was in China on the Clay Thompson secret tour, and I was bugging them. I said, we need to play basketball. We need to play basketball. I was doing it for selfish reasons. I wanted to play basketball with Clay Thompson. Running the wild, man. It was like so beautiful. And when he put up like 100 shots, all the same. And it didn't matter how many he did. He made a lot of them, by the way, just so you guys know. Seeing him same form every shot. I mean, I'm lucky if I was the same form 10 shots in a row. This guy was doing it 100 shots, same way every time. It was a beautiful, beautiful thing. I will never forget it. And there's one thing to see it when you're watching on TV. It's another thing to see when you're live in the building. When you're in a private jet and you see Klay Thompson right in front of you shooting these shots, you realize, dang, NBA has the best athlete in the world. And I just want to mention that when they pick up that Klay Thompson gets a game shot.
Good. That's a great story. And people don't realize like the guys that are good shooters in the NBA are unbelievably good. Like I've heard stories of Klay Thompson getting to the gym and missing like just a handful of shots throughout an entire workout and that sort of stuff. And yeah, that's a nice badge of honor to have Klay whacks a three in your face for the win. Yeah, you don't want to like undercut the NBA All-Star. That's funny. That's funny. All right, I'm gonna go to Colton Turner on Instagram. He's got a question. He says, "Hey, Shot Mechanics, quick question. I'm trying to fix my form. When I shoot, my set point is at the side of my head, and I want it to be more in front of my face, like Curry or Kyrie. Any tips?" Yeah. So good question there, Colton. So he's basically talking about he has like a set point on the side of his head and he wants to bring it more in front of his face. A lot of times what can help is if you actually tilt your feet a little bit or put your right hip, if you're a right-handed shooter, a little closer to the rim. And that'll kind of like nudge that set point over just a little bit. That's one thing that I see that happens a lot of times with squared shooters, because if they try to move it over in front of their face, if their hips are squared to the rim, they get a lot of shoulder tension, their elbow starts to flare, and it can kind of feel kind of funky. So that's one thing that can help you out and make it a little bit easier, is just try tilting your feet off to the side just a little bit. And sometimes that makes a big difference. Good question though. For sure. For sure. And it's funny because I always talk about it all the time. Everybody's a little bit different. Some people are trying to pull the set point this way. Some people are trying to pull their set point this way. And, a lot of the times shooting is a chain reaction where the thing that's wrong isn't actually the thing that's wrong. It's something further down the body or further down the release or whatever, that sort of thing. So a lot of the times if you have an issue with one of your mechanics, it's more so about, finding what's down that power line or down that power chain. And a lot of times that's where the issues are at. They might be in the feet. They might be in the hips. They might be where you're loading the ball, all that sort of good stuff.
I got one right here. Just as a lead 14, do you have your tips on how to be a good shooter like Kyle Korver? Now, are there any tips to get your release, or is it just practice, repeat, and repetitiveness, and you'll get quicker naturally?
Yeah. So, obviously the more you practice something, the better at it you'll get, probably the quicker you're going to get. So, that definitely is true. I'm not saying that's not true, but I'd say there's probably like two main tips that I help shooters with again and again and again, quicken up their release without changing anything in their mechanics, really. Tip number one is to be prepared for your shot preparation. So what you see with a lot of players is they're like, man, like I feel like my mechanics are good, but I just can't get shots off. It's not quick. They're just not ready to shoot the ball when they catch it. So if you watch like the best shooters, guys like Kyle Korver especially is phenomenal at this. He's got really itchy fingers. When the pass is getting ready to come, he's ready to catch. He's loaded. His hips are down. He's kind of like getting ready to shoot before the balls actually get there. If you watch a lot of younger players, they'll end up catching the ball facing away from the hoop, turn to face the hoop, and then get their shot off, right? If you see a lot of the elite level shooters, they're already down. They're waiting for the ball. Maybe they're even like, if they're pointing this way towards the hoop and the ball's coming from the side, they're already loaded. So as they catch, they can go right up into it. So number one, shot preparation for sure. Number two, my secret tip that I use with players over and over and over again is what I call hot lava. And it's basically just the contact time of your feet and the ground, meaning as soon as you touch a basketball, so as soon as the ball gets to your hands, you want your feet to pop off the ground and pretend like it's turned to hot lava the second you touch that leather. Because if you do, that generates your momentum a lot faster. And one of the biggest issues that a lot of players have is they catch the ball and then they kind of do a slow wind up, right? And that's really where the kind of the slowness in their shot comes from, not from their mechanics or where they're putting their hand or how far they're bringing down the ball, but instead it's kind of that slow wind up. So if you can really pop your feet like hot lava off the ground, makes a huge difference. Good question.
How about what about seats? Now, this is a lot of things a bad habit, but that can be your shot if you learn how to shoot without the seats, right? If you put a little bit more finger on there, I have a bad habit of shooting the seats. Okay, I'm guilty of it. I like to shoot the seats, but what do you think about that? You shouldn't shoot the seats.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like a lot of people put a ton of emphasis on it. And I don't think it really matters as much as people think it does. It might matter a little bit. I grew up and I had coaches all the time tell me, get your fingers in, get the fingers in the seams. So I'm to the point now where I catch and I rotate the ball in my hand and I shoot and it doesn't slow anything down. And so it's not necessarily like bad. And I think you do get better rotation. You might get a little bit better touch. But if you're wanting to get a quick release, I wouldn't worry about it too much, right? Normally, if you can just get like a piece of seam, that's enough. So it's one of those things where it's kind of like in a hierarchy of things that help a shooter, it's like a little bit further down the list. So I would probably master some other stuff first before worrying too much about it. But if you watch a lot of the great players, some of them like to spin the ball in the seams. Some of them don't. It just kind of depends person to person, on that sort of front. But good question.
Yeah, Mamba Entry on Instagram here. He's asking like, what is the point of shooting the seats? I know Kobe did. Like for me, like Coach said, he gets a little bit better rotation, a better touch. And for me, it's just kind of like aligns my shot when I shoot without the seats. A lot of my shots are short, and I don't get as good rotation. When you get that rotation in the ball, it sucks the ball into the
Yep.
that rotation. So for me, shooting with the seats, I'm just more comfortable with it. And I don't know a ton of the science behind rotation. Maybe you can touch on this, but I do know that rotation sucks the ball into much more than a shot with sideways rotation or no rotation at all.
Yeah, and there's a couple of reasons for it. Number one, like you mentioned, touch, right? If you have that backspin and you end up getting a piece of the rim, generally it can kind of suck it into the basket just a little bit more. And then the other part is with that backwards, rotation, it also slows the velocity of the basketball. So you get a little bit softer touches because that backwards revolution is slowing the actual velocity of the ball coming down. So That being said, there's been a lot of great shooters in the history of the NBA that don't have that great grade of rotation, and they still have a pretty soft touch. So it's not the be all end all, but all things equal, I like having my fingers in the seams, but it just kind of depends person to person. Good question. I'm gonna take one from YouTube over here real fast, and then at the end of the third, let's go through the third quarter. And then we'll do a live live stream with Jaron on his Instagram. And let's do sneaker related questions over there. So you guys on YouTube have your sneaker related questions chambered, because we got some good ones coming up here. All right, let's hear. Thomas Shinstock on YouTube wants to know, how is Joe Harris so consistent? Good question. Joe Harris busted on the seam. You said earlier, leading the league in 3-point field goal percentage, correct? Yeah, won the NBA three-point contest. There's been a huge rise in Joe Harris stock. One of the main reasons why is because he has a really repeatable motion, right? He's very compact, very consistent, and so there's not a whole lot of variables in his jump shot. With some players you see have a wide shot line out to the side, or they've got kind of a weird shimmy as they're going into their shot, or they've got a hitch, or they bring the ball up, then bring it back, then bring it forward. Right. The thing with Joe is it's really smooth and it's really consistent, and a lot of that's going to be him putting in the time and effort over the years. And a lot of it's just because he's dialing his mechanics. So, he's definitely on the upswing when it comes to guys in the league. And a lot of it has to do with that same sort of stuff. So good question.
Are there any mechanics from a particular player that kind of stump you? I just don't understand that guy's mechanics. We talked about a little shit or Twitch. The first thing that came to mind to me was, Reggie Miller's shot.
Yeah.
In his hands together. We can talk about Tom Barrett. Reggie Miller is one of the best shooters ever. Tom Barrett is one of the best shooters ever.
Yeah.
Reggie Miller is one of the best shooters ever. And his form is kind of perplexing to me. So is there any guy in the league right now that his mechanics or his shot kind of stuff?
For the most part, guys in the league have pretty good looking jump shots. There's been a lot of development when it comes to shooting in the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, obviously the pace and space, the Warriors kind of changed the entire dynamic. So for the most part, the guys that are good shooters generally have pretty good mechanics. In the past, there's been guys like, Kevin Martin, who played for the Thunder for a little bit, I want to say, where he used to bring the ball way up the left side of his body, Lonzo Ball, kind of that same sort of thing. So right now, the guys that are good shooters for the most part have pretty repeatable mechanics in the NBA. One of my all-time favorites, Peja Stojakovic, had kind of some funky form that ended up working out really well for him, as he's one of the all-time great three-point shooters. But off the top of my head, pretty much the guys that have issues with their mechanics are still the guys that aren't shooting super great, or need a little bit of help. A really good kind of case study of that would be somebody like Blake Griffin. 3-4 years ago, outside jumper wasn't really there, struggled a little bit from the free throw line. And then all of a sudden, just in the last year and a half, he really kind of tweaked and dialed in his shooting mechanics. And he's been absolutely a monster. I mean, all-star this season, having one of statistically the best seasons of his career. And a lot of it is because he can unlock that game from the outside. So good question, though. Shout out Chris Staples. I love me some Chris Staples. So here's another question from Nassar. Maybe this will be kind of probably the last one or two here before we switch over to Jaron's feed. But he wants to know how to increase your shooting range. This is probably, I would say, the number one question I get over and over and over again. And it totally makes sense, right? There's a lot of players that can't shoot three-pointers or that struggle when they shoot three-pointers. And a lot of it has to do with that power issue. So, generally, how to increase your range, there's a few different options. Option number one, like I kind of mentioned earlier, tilting your feet just a little bit off to the side. Tension and restricting flow and fluidity is probably the two main things that kind of really limit, your shooting. I'm a little bit of a rogue when it comes to shooting instruction. A lot of shooting instructors don't believe there's such thing as tension, but what you notice is if you tilt your feet off to the side just slightly, it ends up allowing your shoulder muscles and body biomechanically to come smoother up in a line, and you don't have that push down. John, earlier in the broadcast, we talked about, really strong, bulky guys having a hard time shooting. Again, that's probably one of the reasons. So Number one, to try tilt your feet slightly off to the side. If you're a right-handed shooter, tilt them off to the left. If you're a left-handed shooter, tilt them off to the right. Number two is to load the basketball lower. A lot of players do what I call setting it on a shelf, meaning as they're getting ready to shoot, they set the ball right up here on their shoulder. And when they do that, it's actually basically just like starting the ball too high in the process. So all you have is just this push. If you watch most of the great shooters, guys like Paul George in this game, Jalen Brunson in this game, they're going to load the ball lower down by their waist or sometimes even down by their thighs. And then they get that smooth fluid shot up rather than a here and a cast, right? I always think about like the example I give would be like throwing an uppercut punch. If you were going to get ready to like knock somebody out that was talking trash, not that I condone any violence, but if you needed to, if you started your uppercut punch like 2 inches away from a chin, it's not going to be very powerful, right? You need that momentum, that fluidity to really generate that power into the punch, right? And so shooting's kind of the exact same sort of thing, is you can actually load the ball lower and then get more momentum up and, increase that range. Now, what everybody's going to say, probably some of you guys at home watching this broadcast are going, yeah, but it's going to be slow. It's going to get stripped. It's going to get blocked. Totally not true, right? If you do it like the shot preparation that I talked about earlier, and you use the hot lava technique that I talked about earlier, you get your shot off over everybody. I mean, think about like Steph Curry. He shoots the ball down by his waist most of the time, and he's the best three-point shooter in history, and he doesn't have problems getting his shot off. Ray Allen, one of the best shooters in history and who's known for his quick release. Go back and watch the Ray Allen footage, and he puts the ball down by his waist every single shot for the most part, right? So it's really not any slower. That's kind of an old myth. So try loading the ball lower, and you're going to be surprised at the results. And then tip number 3, so we got tilting the feet, right? We've got loading the ball a little bit lower. And then so tip number 3 is to let your feet drift forward on your landing just slightly. So a lot of players will jump up and land in the exact same spot. If you let your feet come forward just a little bit on the landing, that's going to give you a little bit of a pendulum into your shot. It's going to get you a little bit more optimal art. Yep, some people call it the sway. And a lot of people do it and they don't even realize it. So, if we watch this game right here, if you watch him take a 3, yep, lands inside the 3-point line. I mean, pretty much every single time you're going to see a pro do it. So, that's one thing that can help extend those ranges. So if you do those 3 things, even if you just do one of those things, a lot of times I'll have players increase their shooting range 3, 4, 5 feet just off of one of those tips. I was working with a 7th grade girl a few weeks ago who had a hard time shooting threes. After just like 2 of those little implementations, I had her shooting out by the volleyball line pretty smoothly and pretty easily, just from kind of optimizing those 2 mechanics. So for sure, those are the big ones. We probably got time for one more. John, why don't you choose somebody on Instagram here, and then we'll shut down this live. Good question. So KD's knees as they bend in when they shoot. Should I do it? Should I not do it? I hear that a lot. That term with your knees bending is called vulgus. And it's something that's going to naturally happen from time to time, depending on how your foot position is, depending on how your body position is. So you'll see that happen a lot, especially if players are shooting off of the dribble, pulling up to their dominant hand side. So like if you watch Steph Curry shoot, most of the time when he pulls up going to his right-hand side, his knees cave in a little bit because he's planning, he's stopping that momentum. And so his power is coming together kind of in the middle, and he's exploding up. Generally, it's not something that's super worrisome unless it's over-exaggerated, unless you're doing it on purpose, and if your feet aren't parallel. The number one thing that we see a lot of the times is if your feet are like cockeyed, so like maybe one's straight and then one's off to the side, that might cause your knees to vulgus. If your both toes are in, that might cause some vulgus. If both feet are out, that might cause some vulgus. So as long as your feet are parallel with each other, generally it's not that big of a deal. And sometimes it's going to happen depending on your body. One reason why it probably happens to KD is because he has such long legs, so as he bends his knees, they have to do something, right? So I wouldn't worry about it too much. I wouldn't do it on purpose. I think that could be a little bit dangerous over time. But as long as your feet are parallel with each other, so if they're both tilted or they're both straight or they're both kind of at the same angle together, then it's probably okay. Good question. I love it. I love it. So yeah. So once we shut this down, go ahead and make sure you're following JAHRONMON and bring your sneaker related questions if you're a part of my audience, and we'll see you there shortly. Oh my God. Good stuff, Jaron. So, hey, everybody tuning in inside of NBA League Pass, feel free to jump on this next live call and ask your sneaker-related questions. I know when it comes to sneaker stuff, Jaron is the absolute man, knowing the tech, knowing the fabrics, knowing, what works best for what kind of players. So, my YouTube audience over here, I know you guys can't necessarily hear Jaron as much right now, unless you're watching the League Pass broadcast. But feel free to start asking some sneaker related questions, and I'll feed him his direction. We got ourselves a barn burner. There we go. Sent it. Watch live. There we go. I'm in. And then. And now I sent a little request there. And we're in. Plenty of barns to burn out in that direction. So yeah, 76-80. We got ourselves a Dallas Mavericks possession. So Jaron, I want to start out with a question for you because, obviously you're the sneaker guru, all the models that are coming out, all that sort of good stuff. What's your all-time favorite model and your all-time favorite colorway of that model? Yeah. Okay. Okay. That is baller. I love it. I love it. All right. So here's a question from Mars Zero on your Instagram. Is the ZO2 worth getting for the traction? Is the ZO2 worth getting for the traction? Yeah, yeah.
Round up, get basketball, and I'm asking where outside the that dirt and dust was grinding. I don't want to name any gyms out there. Just so that don't say names, of course.
Pretty much every 24-hour fitness. Shots fired.
The traction on the Why Not Trend is absolutely excellent. Now, skeptical of this first going in because I don't think that it goes up top of the stereo reels. Remember the limited time late stereo processors. There's like a circular pattern on the outsole, and I thought that was interesting. However, that circular pattern allows for multi-directional coverage. You have coverage in every direction, every direction. So I really like the traction on the Why Not Trend. Do I think it's worth getting just for that feature? Yes, I do. I think it's one of the best traction setups for this season, at least. The best traction I've ever experienced was two sneakers. One of my surprises was Kobe 9.
Oh, okay.
It's a really good traction setup. Wasn't extremely durable, but oh my gosh, the traction is like glue. And Air Jordan 1,
Really?
86. Now, I talked about the floor collector. I told you last I love it. I wear the Jordan 1. The traction held up. The traction was not a problem. He doesn't have a lot of cushion as a ball since 1986. But the traction in the Air Jordan 1 is one of the best traction setups of all time. So whenever a shoe has bad traction nowadays, I ask the question,
How is it possible?
how is it possible? Because Jordan has had good traction since 1986. So why not Jordan have excellent traction? And they also have some other good features, like the cushioning setup. We have unlocked concealed air in the forefoot. Super explosive. If you're looking for court feel like Coach Carlin looks for his sneakers, this might not be the sneaker for you. But if you're looking for bounce, you're attacking the basket, tracking rebounds, five down the floor, you want to feel explosive like Westbrook, why not just is going to do so.
I dig. I dig.
Now, I had a question earlier in the chat. I can't find his name, but he asked, should we get the Harden 3 or Kyrie 5s? Now, this kind of plays into the question we kind of talked about earlier. People ask me what sneaker they should get. I'm a point guard. What sneaker should I get? I'm a big.
Yeah.
That doesn't really help me out. I need to know what your play style is like. So if you say, hey, I'm a guard, quick, I like to use my handles, I don't really get off the floor very often, I would say get the Kyrie 5s. Great court feel, decent amount of traction, and the cushioning setup is low profile.
Nice.
That's how you get that good court feel. I would say go with something like that. If you're someone who says, you know what, I want to feel a little bit of bounce, you don't have to be explosive. You just personally want something that you can feel. You want to feel the cushioning. You don't have to be explosive again. You just want to feel something under your foot. I would say go with the hard foam. So it really depends on what your personal preference is. There's not really a shoe out there that's perfect for everyone in every play style. It's versatile sneakers, like Paul George's sneaker or PG3. It's versatile for a lot of different play styles, but it's probably best suited for someone like Paul George's sneaker. It's made for the guy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Made for a wing player. He's explosive, but he also needs to be quick because Paul George does have a little bit of quickness and he handles the ball. So if you imagine yourself a Paul George style player, one of the PG3s you're probably going to enjoy. The thing where it gets tricky is the fit of the sneaker.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can say, hey, I don't like this shoe. I'm a taller guy. I don't like this shoe. I have all my ass Jamie's sneaker, but his shoe fits very unique because Jamie's foot is a pretty unique foot. And
Yeah.
Nike does a good job of trying to make the shoe versatile for a ton of different people because they're trying to sell it to a ton of different people. But let's be honest, Jamie's foot recently is more narrow than something like a Jordan sneaker or Westbrook sneaker. So, I really recommend, I know you guys love Amazon and online shopping. Go into the store, your local sneaker store, try the shoe on, see how it feels. Because I don't know about you guys, if the shoe fits me not perfect, it throws me off my game. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I've had a few pairs of the KDs, and you're totally right. Like I feel like those fit a little bit more narrow most of the time. So good stuff on that one. Um,
You're right. Pretty sure yeah, 99 has I play hard to dribble a lot. Hard to hitting or kind of used to be my best bet. So if you say you play a lot of hard defense and you dribble a lot, I'd probably go with some kind of because it gets me a little bit quicker. The hardness, very intentional, but it doesn't tell the time. Give me the user into the phone, but with the kind of more responsive and a little bit more bounce back. Kind of increase your reaction time. Play hard defense. Try to get one spot together. You're trying to keep up with the guy you're guarding. I would go with the kind of quicker, and I personally feel a lot quicker in some of these heavies rather than the hardest.
that's good stuff. So I got a question for you here. The Jordan line, right? One thing that I've always loved about the Jordan line is that there's something for everything. There's something for everybody. They've taken risks with different shoes. They've tried different things. So the Jordan line, I want you to give me your number one Jordan shoe to rock with a pair of jeans casually, and I want you to give me your number one performance Jordan model.
Okay, so this is a very interesting question because the Jordan line is so it's been around for so long.
Yeah.
You kind of have to separate. There's kind of a line. Say probably Jordan 15 and on, you can rock those before. From the 14 back, you should probably rock those.
They're a little tough.
Rock them like stuff. It's kind of interesting how the Jordan line has evolved over the years.
Yeah.
My favorite Jordan rock pair of jeans, I'm torn. It's either the Jordan 1. The Jordan 1 is so classic.
Yeah.
The colorways is simple. Black and red, blue and black, white, red, and black. That's simple. Like
Yeah.
simple. Those are the original colorways. You can rock those with anything.
And just iconic. They're just iconic.
Icon. The Jordan 5 is so unique. I love the shark design that was
Yep.
designed by our World War II fighter jet and the reflective tongue. My favorite thing about sneakers is when they have that reflective material. The Jordan 5 has that big reflective tongue. I actually use those as my rain boots. I don't even know what's saying that right now. I like them. That's what I do. Those are my leaders. My leaders are the shoes that I wear on not so good weather days when I'm trying to get dirty. Jordan 5 is definitely one of my favorites. So for the performance side, this is the question is easy. The best sneaker that I've ever played in, not in Kobe, is the Air Jordan 29. Now the 28 was the one with the sweet zipper.
Yep.
29 was the one after that, and it was a pretty basic looking sneaker. And I was telling you, I told you about it. I asked draw me the thing the basketball sneaker looks like. I think most of them look like the Jordan 29. It's just a traditional, simple look. The performance speaks for itself. It had a performance woven upper, so it's like a soft blanket around your foot. That
Yeah.
supported enough to support you. And the cushioning setup, the traction, like we talked about earlier, was absolutely fantastic. Super tacky. And the cushioning setup makes it explosive. The only thing they could have really thought was add is the heel, because the heel was just left alone. The 4-foot no unlock heel there, absolutely fantastic. So the Jordan 29 is my favorite Jordan of all time.
Okay. And I feel like that's a little bit of the general consensus, right? Like weren't a lot of people big fans of the Jordan 29 just because it was like such an overall great shoe, right?
It was definitely a shoe that catered towards a lot of players. And like I said, there's always going to be an ideal play style for a particular shoe. Like I wouldn't say the Jordan 29 is actually like big man kind of heavy on there. That's what Perkins calls. But off guard or maybe wants to feel explosive on their rim runs or attacks and baskets.
Cool.
Jordan 29. If I could only play Blazers for the rest of my life, it might be that.
Really? I like it. I dig. Yeah, the Jordan line, what's weird about the Jordan line is it feels like they'll have some that are awesome for performance and then some that, maybe lack a little something in performance here and there. But it seems like in the last few years they've kind of started to dial it in a little bit. But I got another good one here for you that I'm actually really curious from Krister SM99 on Instagram, and they say, "What's your opinion on Curry's evolution? The design has changed a lot." Yeah, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the Curry's design evolution.
Yeah, so I think, you know what, this is a really tough subject because I love Under Armour. However, I think that they're kind of being pushed by the general consensus. The Curry line and the Curry I think Curry they kind of lost something. Right? And a lot of folks think Curry is great. So when they lost those people from the Curry 3 visually, they came out with the Curry 4, which is a beautiful
Yeah.
sneaker. However, I thought the performance was a little bit lacking. It just wasn't for me. It wasn't for me. I know some people that's their favorite sneaker, and I respect that. For me, as we go on with the Curry line, you're right. Kristen wrote on Instagram that it's actually kind of like Under Armour's trying to find their stride still. It's still a young company compared to Adidas in the 90s and Puma. Under Armour is a young company.
Yeah.
I still think they're trying to find their identity. And when you have such a big star like Steph Curry, I think you have to really come correct with the design. And I think some big things are going to be coming down the pipeline with Under Armour. I've seen, I've heard some things about the future Curry sneakers. But I personally believe right now, I'm believing the Curry 6 stuff just goes out right now.
Nice.
It's a solid sneaker, but I think it's lacking the wow factor
Okay.
right now. When I first saw the Curry 4s in the NBA Finals, I said, wow. I said, wow, that's a beautiful sneaker. And when I got them on my feet, I said, oh, that is okay. But I think Steph Curry sneakers are extremely popular with the youngins.
Yep.
I think him and Kyrie have the most popular sneakers amongst kids these days. And we talked about earlier, one of your favorite sneakers, the SC03 or SC302.
Yeah.
We call that team line.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Team sneaker.
Yeah, well, so there's two of them right now. Both of those sneakers are excellent. You like the twos, I like the ones. So if you're not a huge fan of the Curry signature sneaker series, maybe try his team line because that's Chris Collins, one of his favorite sneakers.
I got 4 pairs this year. I got 4 pairs of those.
Maybe take your sneaker line, maybe check out his team line. It's pretty good.
Yeah, yeah. I really like those team lines. Even more so than the signature ones personally. So yeah, that's a good option. Um, I saw a really I saw a great question that I was also curious. A lot of these I'm kind of fishing because I want to know the answers myself. But let's see here. Namwalk wants to know best shoe for guys with ankle injuries. Is there something that just from an ankle stability standpoint's the best? I'm somebody who like 2-3 years ago, I had like a big ankle issue that just like happened again and again and again and again. So like, what are your thoughts on that?
This is a very controversial topic because people think low tops are bad for your ankles. Um, I don't agree with that. I mean, I think some people feel safer when something's wrapped around their ankle.
Uh-huh.
But a lot of studies have been done that ankle braces, things like that, are more harmful. Now, they're just studies, it's still up in the air for consensus, but there are studies. Some people, I believe at Boise State University, they did some experiments. Shout out to Idaho.
Shout out Idaho. Wow.
They said that when your ankle is more free and when your ankle is restricted by an ankle brace, it's kind of like handcuffing your ankles and it's restricting movement
Yeah.
to keep you free. Now you shouldn't pronate your ankle all the way. That's going to twist and sprain your ankle, but it should allow a little bit of movement. Whereas an ankle brace just kind of locks it in and it restricts it, so it could do more harm than good. For me, I think what's important about finding a sneaker that's good for your ankle is make sure you spend enough time on your ankle, get a high top. If you want your ankle to feel free, get a low top. When it comes down to support features,
Oh,
an
okay.
ankle that has a wider base, that's probably going to be better for you if you have ankle issues because you have a more of a chance of landing
Yeah.
And on the side, it actually rolls back onto the base. So even though those necessarily don't have a wide base, it has a rounded outsole and it makes the transition pretty smooth from heel to toe or just landing on the side of your foot or whatnot. So I think the support features, you got to tune into my performance review. If I say the shoe's really supported, that's probably going to be good for your ankles. If I say the support is lacking, maybe the upper is made of a flimsy material, it's not really supported, that's not going to be the best for you. But first, you have to figure out if you feel comfortable with something around the ankle or without.
Ah, good answer. And it's interesting too. Yeah. I mean, the whole ankle studies, I mean, I know some performance coaches that like don't let their players wear ankle braces because they're afraid of the impact it has on the knees and the hips and that sort of stuff. And then I know other performance coaches that slap everybody in an ankle brace until they can prove the stability of their own ankles. So, yeah, I think, it totally makes sense. Like, I've played in, is it the Kyrie 3? Is that the real rounded ones that had the strap that came across the front? Which one? I think it was the Kyrie, the 2. Yeah. Yeah. So that one's a great example of like, I wore those and had phenomenal ankle support, even though like they weren't necessarily like the widest of shoe, but that curvature like seemed to really help for sure.
That's a very unique thing that I think coaches should implement because, like I said, not many people have fantastic footwork. I've even looked over it sometimes where my footwork isn't A1. And so if I'm landing awkwardly on my foot, that curvature on the outsole is there to support me and help me get back on the right track. So definitely.
Cool. That makes sense. Yeah, Kyrie 2, great for ankles. Some people in my chat are popping up saying that. Okay, so here's a good question for you from Joey Lambert. Shouts out, Joey. Are the second why nots better than the first? Why nots are great for ankles. I've had both Achilles repaired, he says. But what do you think's better, first or second why nots?
Why not? Why not? Because the collar is kind of pointy and it kind of rises up
Oh,
in
yeah, yeah, yeah,
certain
yeah.
areas. That might not be the best for you. However, I think the why not twos, not the why not ones, they're not as stiff. The forefoot is decoupled from the rest of the sneaker, which means it allows much more freedom of movement in the forefoot and it doesn't feel as stiff.
Okay.
Why not Air Force Ones have full length too, and sometimes it can feel a little stiff, especially in the midfoot. So why not Air Force Twos were decoupled? The forefoot was separate from the midfoot and heel, so it allowed a lot more movement. I think it is a better sneaker than the why not Air Force Ones. But like I said, for what's his name, Jeremy,
Yeah.
it might not be the best thing for your Achilles, but I would do this. I would try them on in the store, walk around, work them out for a little bit. You don't want to be busting your crossovers in the store, okay? But walk around, make sure you get good movement in there, and see if that back collar, your Achilles, is being irritated by the shoe itself. And if it is, go ahead and pass on. There's a lot of other options out there. But if it isn't, I think you will like that sneaker.
Ah, good question. I saw another question pop up. I can't remember the username here. And I thought it was a good question for us because we've grown an online following. We're kind of in this online space. They want to know what's some secrets to growing your channel or growing your social media following. I mean, I by no means would call myself an expert in any way, shape, or form, but as somebody like both of us have been able to grow an online following, what are some of the keys that you feel contribute to that?
I think big things that I see is consistency and collaboration. You're
Cool.
collaborating with other people like what you're doing right now. It increases their audience, brings their audience to me, brings my audience to you, vice versa. It really good collaboration for me increases my following whenever I collaborate. And then that thing's consistency. If you're consistent, however many uploads per week, if you're consistent on social media, people don't want to follow something that is erratic in their engagement or upload. So consistency and collaboration to me is I think helpful in growing your online following.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense. I agree 100% with those, especially consistency. Like I haven't done a ton of collaborations in the past, but from a consistency standpoint, that's for sure. I would say probably the number one thing that's at least helped me grow an online following. And then the second thing I'd say is you need to deliver some sort of value in every video. I see a lot of people, like my nephew, for example, a few weeks ago was like, hey, like I got this like gaming YouTube channel, like, what do you think? Can you check it out? And I like checked it out. And there was like no value. It was just him playing the game. He wasn't doing any funny commentary. He wasn't talking about, a bunch of different stuff. And so really there was like no reason for somebody to watch his video. So, for you provide a ton of value because you're talking about the way shoes fit, how they perform, if they're a good deal, all this sort of stuff. And I'm doing the same sort of thing, how to get better at shooting, how to get better at ball handling, tricks and tips for different moves. And so, you and I think have both done a really good job of providing value in pretty much every single video. And, sometimes that value could just be entertainment. So if you don't have something to teach or something to go over, you can still, find something to be entertaining and of value. So for sure, I think that totally makes sense. Good stuff.